Hey there, welcome to the Intentional Academy podcast, where we believe that life is best when it is lived on purpose. If you want help finding time for what matters most, launching your dream career, and building a prosperous future, then you should visit us at intentionalacademy.com. I'm your host, and I am thrilled that you are tuning in. We've got a great episode for you today. At the time of this recording, we're on lockdown for the 2020 coronavirus crisis. We haven't left the house in a few weeks. I'm getting stir crazy. My kids are losing their minds, and they aren't old enough to understand what's going on. You'll probably hear them at some point in the background. I hope when you do, you'll pause and reflect for a minute about what an incredible opportunity we're facing. The world won't come to a grinding halt very many times in your life. I think we need to give ourselves permission to pause and soak this all in. Have you stopped to think about how we all responded to this? It started with disbelief. There's something crazy happening overseas. Thank goodness we're far enough away or well prepared so it won't happen here. When it did start happening here, many of our first thoughts, including mine, was, okay, how do we keep going? I teach engineering at a state university. As we started considering the impact of this, we found ourselves in conversations like, how do we run a heat transfer class online? How do we hold a class session that gives our professors a chance to lecture and students a chance to ask questions or work together? How do we give final exams and keep people honest when we aren't in the room to monitor them? In other words, how do we keep doing exactly what we were doing just before this happened? I think you can relate. Have you noticed the way that we've been dragged, kicking and screaming, into the realization that not all of the things we had on our list will get done? I spoke with a colleague the other day, and she issued a challenge to me. I was trying to figure out how to get things done for work despite the fact that my kids keep interrupting. She pointed out that this very well could be the last chance I have to spend significant time with my kids in this phase of their lives. One is 3, the other's 1 year old. This time next year, they'll be completely different people. If I'm careful about which things I keep in my life and which ones I pause on, the corona lockdown has given me a rare chance to be a part of a stage in their lives that I would have largely missed while I was at the office. I see a tremendous opportunity for you. We spend the majority of our lives governed by one simple principle: momentum. Before this corona thing happened, if someone asked you, what are you going to do today? You probably could have pulled together a list pretty easily. Things you had to do at work, things you had to do for school, chores around the house, errands, maybe some time with your friends or family, a hobby. If someone asked you, why are you going to do those things today? What would you have said? Most of us would have had a harder time answering that. We'd say something like, because I have to, or that's my routine. The opportunity we have right now is to ask ourselves why we do the things we do. Why are we committed to the things we are? A disruption like the one we're living through is the perfect break from normalcy that gives us a chance to reevaluate what we're committed to and what we really want our lives to look like. That's the topic of today's episode. We're going to spend some time together rethinking how we spend our time and establishing 4 essential systems to regain control. It's important that we do. I know you're working hard to build the life that you want most, but so many demands are placed on you by the outside world. This is a rare chance to drop things without the usual pressure. We're also living through a time where work-life balance has become a lot more complicated. The boundaries are blurred as we scramble to get things done and stay in touch. Listen, we've got one chance at this. You can't go make more time. This is the one life you get to live. Let's use this episode to explore what it means to live a life you love, get things done, and enjoy it all. But before we get to that, I'd like you to know that this episode is sponsored by our free Intentional Academy community. The Intentional Academy community is an online discussion group with one goal: to bring people like us together so that we can support each other in living our best lives. You don't have to figure this out on your own. You're here listening to this right now. What that tells me is that you have a feeling that there is more to life than what you're currently experiencing. We each get one life, one chance to spend our time. The Intentional Academy community is here to help make sure you spend your life doing things you'll look back on and be glad you did. The big thing that many of us are missing is support. You may have plenty of folks who give you encouragement or advice or offer reassurance, but do you have anyone to talk to who's working on the same kinds of growth as you? Do you have anyone who's there to keep you doing the hard work of showing up and making something that matters day in and day out? If not, it can be pretty lonely. I don't want that for you, which is why I'm inviting you to join us in the free Intentional Academy community. We use a free messaging platform that runs on mobile, web, and desktop apps, and we've got a number of channels in our community so that you can participate in the daily discussions that are most helpful for you. If you'd like to join, visit intentionalacademy.com/community and enter your name and email address in the form. We'll send you our community guidelines along with an invitation link, an invitation to be connected to a community of people like us doing things like this. intentionalacademy.com/community is where you should go to sign up and take the first step to making what you learn in today's episode matter. Visit intentionalacademy.com/community to join us and start regaining control of your time, career, and money. intentionalacademy.com/community. All right, I'd like to start out by giving you the punchline. This isn't a mystery novel with a big reveal at the end. The thing you need to know, the entire point of this episode, is that the way you spend your time is a measure of what you really value. The way you spend your time is a measure of what you really value. Stay with me here. We all have an idea of what's important to us, and if someone were to ask us, we'd probably be able to rattle off a list. My family, or my career, my faith, maybe my fitness. Have you ever noticed that your answer changes depending on who's asking? I have one list for my parents, another for my climbing buddies, and a third for my spouse. It's not that we change our values depending on who's in the room, it's just that different things come to the front of our mind in different contexts. Here's the thing. We can say whatever we want to. Ever hear that cliche that actions speak louder than words? I'm much more interested in what my actions say about me. This all hinges on one key idea. Time is a one-way street. I'm not trying to be morbid here, but we don't get to back up. Most aspects of life don't work that way. We usually get to try again. If I spend all my money and go broke, I can always go get a new job and make more money. If my car breaks, I can save and buy another. Most things are replaceable when we really think about it. The one thing I can't get back? Time. 6:52 a.m. on Friday, March 27th just ticked by. It's gone and it won't be back. If I spend all of my time, I can't go make more. I'm happy with how I spent that precious minute. Are you? Do me a favor and consider how you spent your time last week. Try and make a list, hour by hour. What did you do all day? What are the things you spent big chunks of time on? What does this list say about your values? One of the core messages of the Intentional Academy is that we want you to spend your time on purpose. Spend your time intentionally. Let's unpack that. Then I'll give you 4 tools that you can use to take back control of your time and spend your precious life doing what matters most. I took a survey of my students and learned that the typical full-time college student in my classes works 16 hours a week at some sort of hourly job earning $10, $12 an hour. When I asked them if they were stressed about having enough time to get their schoolwork done, every hand in the classroom shot up. They were all worried that they didn't have enough time to do their homework, class projects, reading assignments, and study for exams. Then I asked how many times a week they ate out at a restaurant, a food truck, fast food joint, whatever. How many times a week did they head to the coffee shop for a cappuccino? We crunched some numbers and discovered that the typical student in my class was working 10 hours a week to pay for trips to restaurants and coffee shops. We did a little math and figured out that they could probably drop 8 of those hours if they were willing to prepare their own food. Can you imagine what somebody would do with 8 more hours to devote to their studies? That's an entire workday. This is a classic example of what it looks like to spend your time unintentionally. It creeps up without our realizing it. First we think, dang, I'm broke, I could use some income. So we go get a part-time job. Then we find ourselves a little overloaded with school and work and have trouble finding the time to get things done. When we're stressed, we tend to spend more money because we don't have the time to do things like cook for ourselves. So we stop at a drive-thru on the way home from work, or we drop by a coffee shop to get a little pick-me-up. Next thing you know, you're spending the majority of your work hours earning the money it takes to keep yourself going because you were working in the first place. My students discovered they were really trading their study time for the chance to eat fast food. Spending time with intention means stopping to ask yourself what you're really trying to accomplish. Oftentimes, we don't realize the consequences of the way we're spending our time because they don't feel directly linked. Here's a great example from my own life. My favorite part of my job as a professor is office hours. I love the chance to sit down kneecap to kneecap with a student and work through challenges together. I'm thrilled that my students come seeking help for their classwork, but they also come for mentorship. We end up talking about their careers and their dreams, their personal finances, their schedules. But I have many responsibilities that demand my time and attention at work. When I first started teaching, I found myself getting behind just a little bit further each day. One thing on the list didn't get done, then two, then three. I found myself scrambling to make sure I was ready for class, preparing class the day of instead of ahead of time. A few times I even ended up in front of a class full of students without a clear plan for what we'd do that day. I started to get stressed, so I started staying a little later. A few minutes turned into a half hour, turned into an hour. Now, work-life balance is extremely important to me. Go check out episode 1 at intentionalacademy.com/1. I knew I had to fix something, but I was stuck and I couldn't see it for myself. I was sharing this with one of my students and he made a very wise observation. He explained to me that when I invite a student in and spend time with them outside of my scheduled office hours, I don't feel the pain of the bad decision until later. I asked him what he meant, and he said, take out a picture of your son. When you go home late, this kid gets less time with his dad. You get less time with your son, who will be grown and gone before you know it. The problem is, when someone knocks on your door, you'd rather talk with them than write lesson plans. But you're not saying no to the lesson plans. You're saying no to your son, even though you won't feel the pain of that until several hours later. We both know you'll stay late at work to finish those lesson plans because it has to be done. You'll feel the pain when you get home and you don't get to spend time with your boy. Whoa. Talk about insight. To be honest, I was so blown away I didn't know what to say. I tried to collect myself and started to put the picture away. My student said, "What are you doing?" Putting my picture away. No. If you want to fix this, hang that picture on the inside of your door. That way, when someone knocks outside your scheduled office hours, you can take a minute to think about who you really want to say no to. The student or your son? That picture hung on the inside of my door for years. I recently changed jobs and I just found the box it was in, and I will be putting it back up the minute we return to work after this whole coronavirus thing. Have you ever done this? Made a decision that didn't cause pain until later? If you've ever borrowed money to buy something and then felt the sting when you got the bill a few weeks later, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Borrowing money has the same effect. You walk out of a shopping experience with new stuff, but you don't feel the consequence of that decision in your bank account until a few days or even a few weeks later. The same is true for time, but with an added problem. You can't borrow time. You can't pay it back. If you've ever spent all day working on an assignment for a class, even though you had an exam and another one the next day, you've experienced this. Deadlines do funny things to our thought processes. If something's due tonight, it feels important. If not, the lack of urgency moves it farther down the list. I give my students a week to do their assignments. In a typical week, over 75% of them turn in the assignment 1 hour before it's due, at 11 o'clock at night on a Friday. I actually changed my deadlines in response to this, making things due at 5 p.m. instead of midnight on Friday. Why? Well, because I'd rather you turn it in at 4:30 and then go have an evening off. So we run into this funny thing where we'll spend all day working on a homework assignment that's worth maybe 1% of our final grade while putting off studying for a midterm that's worth 20%. We don't feel the pain of spending too long on the homework assignment until later. either when we realize we're going to have to pull an all-nighter studying, or when we sit down at that exam the next day to discover that we are underprepared. So that's what it looks like to spend your time without intention. The time goes by, you're busy, you're doing things, but you're not making the kind of progress you wanted to. You're not living according to your values. My students are important to me, but not more important than my son. I should never choose to work late on behalf of my students at the expense of time with my son. I should make decisions during the day that help me get my critical jobs done and then go home to my family. So, what's it look like to live with intention? How do we shift from spending all day working on the wrong assignment to feeling a sense of focus and control? How do we stop bouncing from thing to thing in the moment and get it all done so that we can spend more time enjoying ourselves? It means being clear on what you're committed to, what it takes to satisfy those commitments, and what you're actually trading when you choose to spend time on one thing over another. That's the mindset that empowers me to make an impact at work, spend time with my family, run the Intentional Academy, and pursue my hobbies. I managed to get a lot done, but I also managed to sneak out and rock climb 2 or 3 days a week. I love the way that I spend my precious time, and if you're willing to do the hard work of putting the right systems in place, you can too. I'd like to briefly share 4 essential systems that we teach people about here at the Intentional Academy. They are the morning routine, the time budget, the ideal week, and the to-do list. Let me unpack each with enough detail that you can get started. I'm sure we'll be sharing more tips and tricks for setting up systems like these in future workshops, future episodes, but in the meanwhile, don't forget about the Intentional Academy community where we provide support on these things every day for free. Essential system number 1, the morning routine. I read a survey a few years ago that showed the vast majority of people who are considered high income earners wake up over 2 hours before they have to leave the house in the morning. This same survey showed that only a tiny fraction of people who are considered low income earners do this. I know there's a lot more to life than money, but I also have a belief. Money follows impact. The typical high income earner has a bigger paycheck because they do something that makes a bigger impact for others. Personally, I hope to make a huge impact and enjoy the income that comes as a reward, so I look to successful people for examples. When the majority of people who I look up to do the same thing, I start thinking it might be considered best practice. They get up 2 hours before leaving the house, so do I. What are they doing for those 2 hours? Well, I know they aren't just rolling out of bed, rushing to get dressed, grabbing some food as they head to the car. 2 hours, that's a lot of time. It turns out most of these people are spending their mornings following a routine. Call it a morning ritual. They all have their own, but they could give you a list. First, I spend 15 minutes meditating. Then I make a cup of coffee. I read the news, write in my journal, make my to-do list. Who knows? The point is, one of the key things you can do to help yourself get on top of your time is put a system in place that helps you start each day with clarity and energy. We teach people at the Intentional Academy to take some time for yourself every day. You can design a morning ritual that works for you, or if you're not a morning person, a nighttime ritual. Follow your own energy here. The point is to take some intentional time every day to do 3 key tasks: reflect, plan, and grow. Take a few minutes to ask yourself if yesterday went the way you wanted it to. Did you accomplish what you set out to do? Did you spend your time according to your values? What took longer than you thought it should? Next, ask yourself what needs to happen today. Make a list, sort it by priority. Lastly, take some time every day to grow. Listen to a podcast while you take a walk or a jog. I'm always reading a nonfiction book about some topic unrelated to my job. I try to find something that causes me to grow into a well-rounded person. You never know where you'll end up. For example, I am constantly flattered by my teaching evaluations. The students have a lot of kind things to say about me as an educator. I think one of the main reasons for this is that while my colleagues study journal articles and formal academic texts about pedagogy and praxis, yeah, go Google those words, I spend my time reading about marketing. Marketers are expert communicators. Their job is to take a new idea and get it in your head so that you'll go take action. Gee, that sounds a lot like learning to me. So I borrow tactics from marketing and I use them to sell my students on the subjects I teach. I would have never thought of this on my own. It happened while reading a marketing book that I just happened to grab on a whim. Now it's central to what I do for a living. So, one more time. Create a routine that gives you some intentional time every day to reflect, plan, and grow. Essential system number 2, the time budget. Have you ever heard the expression time is money? I think in a lot of ways the comparison is pretty similar. Both are things we can spend and run out of. Both are things we can trade for future benefits. That's called investing. Both require careful management if we want to stay in control and if we want to spend according to our values. I think one of the biggest problems I used to have, and many people continue to struggle with, is that we work on things until they're done. We make a to-do list and then sit down to get things done. We start on the first task and we work on it until it's done. Then we move on to the next thing, then the next. The problem with this approach is that not all things deserve that much time. Do you remember that example from earlier about trading time for an exam worth 20% of your grade for homework worth 1%? That's a perfect illustration of why we should stop working on things until they're done. Instead, we teach people at the Intentional Academy to budget their time. It doesn't make sense to give that homework assignment 8 hours while studying for an exam for less than 1, unless you're so confident in the exam material you don't need the study time. We teach people to give every item on their to-do list a time limit. I literally have a stopwatch running when I work on tasks, a countdown to when I'll stop, deliver what I've created at that point, and move on. You heard that right. When the time runs out for a task, I stop working on it. Like preparing a dish for a Food Network challenge. 3, 2, 1, stop working. 168 hours. We all get 168 hours each week. No more, no less. That's the time we get to spend on everything from sleeping to homework to going on a date. We teach people to make what's called a zero-based budget. You start with the total number of hours in a week and you write a list of the things you do in priority order. Don't forget to add things like sleep, commute, eating. Next to each item, I write down how long I am willing to spend on it and I subtract from the total as I go. My time budget is complete when I have 0 hours left. So how do we decide how much time to give a task? Use these 3 criteria: priority, required level of quality, your own skill level. Let's start with priority. For example, the exam is worth more than the homework assignment because it carries a bigger weight on your grade. Next, consider the required level of quality. Writing an email has a much lower required level of quality than writing an essay for a scholarship application. Yet I catch students using what I call thesaurus words in emails all the time. Lastly, consider your own skill level. It takes each of us different amounts of time to deliver the same level of quality depending on our skill. I can create a great slideshow in a very short amount of time because I have lots of practice at it. Some of my colleagues really struggle and they spend hours to accomplish the same thing. So mash all of these together, priority, required level of quality, and your skill level, and decide beforehand how long something gets. Have the discipline to stop working when the time runs out. All right, essential system number 3, the ideal week. That time budget is a great tool, but it is hard to act on until you schedule time for it. We teach a system called the Ideal Week at the Intentional Academy, which revolves around adding blocks of time to your calendar for each item in your time budget. This helps you do 2 key things. First, it causes you to do the planning up front. Believe it or not, there's a psychological effect called decision fatigue. Your brain consumes calories along with some other chemicals to do its job. You have a finite supply of these resources each day, and every decision you make requires your brain to consume some. The effort of deciding what to do next is actually really huge, especially if you're doing it in the moment. Have you ever caught yourself running through your to-do list over and over in your head? Have you ever found yourself thinking about the next thing you have to do while you're still working on something else? That's what it looks like to not have a plan. Instead, sit down once a week and block out the time you need, the time you allotted to each task in your time budget. Put it on the calendar. And now you don't have to decide what's next. Just follow the plan. Second, it makes you see the trade off. Sometimes you're going to need more time than you originally budgeted for a task. This happens to me almost every day, and I've been living this system for years. Do you remember that situation where I was trading the time for my son for time with my students without realizing it? That could have easily been prevented if only I had made a schedule and planned out my week. Because when a task runs over, I have to decide what other block of time I am going to take that time from. This helps me make trade-offs with intention instead of becoming a victim to my own whims. For example, if my office hours run over, I make the block bigger on my calendar. Now it overlaps with another block that I have to make smaller. Which block do I choose? The one that aligns with my values. Instead of accidentally making the block of time I spend with my son smaller, I make the block of time for some other work-related task smaller. Essential system number 4, the to-do list. You might wonder why it is that the to-do list is the last system instead of the first. After all, isn't the point to get all these things done? Nope. The point is to get the right things done. That takes putting your priorities together first. Before you make a to-do list, make a morning ritual that gives you clarity, a time budget where you give the things that matter most the time they deserve, and a block of time for each of them on your calendar. Now you're ready to fill those blocks of time with actual tasks that will happen. Here's what I mean. I love to rock climb, and that requires sport-specific fitness. If I want to become a better climber, I need to exercise. In my time budget, I have budgeted 4 hours a week to rock climbing exercise. I put that block of time on my calendar. Now I decide which exercises I'll do. Pay attention here. This is actually a hack that most people miss. If you budget time for a class, which you should, you feel the drive to fill that time. Sometimes that means trying to get the assigned tasks done, but not always. What if you don't have any assignments? Find something related to that class to do on your own. Go visit the professor, read the textbook, watch a YouTube video. Could you imagine what it would be like if you did this? You'd be learning more than ever. By scheduling the blocks of time first and building your to-do list second, you automatically focus on the most important tasks. I have a little time each week blocked out for professional networking as part of my time budget for my job as being a professor. Every week, I spend a few hours networking. It causes me to invest regularly in a task that is often put off because it's important, but it's rarely urgent. The deadline I have for tomorrow is urgent, and there always seems to be one of those. Before I started living this system, the only time I networked was when I was under pressure to find a job. Now, I talk with my colleagues and my mentors around the world on a weekly basis to keep those relationships and the opportunities that come with them fresh. Make your to-do list after your time budget, and you start to focus on the most important things. Well, that does it. Here's a quick recap of what we just talked about. First, we looked at some examples of what it means to live intentionally and what it looks like when we don't. The important thing to focus on is that your life is precious, and you should spend your time on what matters most. I want you looking back with joy that you spent your time on the things that built the life you want most, not just reacting to the demands of the world around you. The best way to do this is to put 4 essential systems in place. Essential system number 1 is the morning routine. You should take the time every day to reflect, plan, and grow. This regular practice ensures that you are aware of where your time is going and that you're happy with the result. Essential system number 2 is the time budget. Start by writing out the number of hours in a week, 168, and list all of the priorities that you have in your life. Assign a time value to each one and subtract as you go. The goal is to spend your time in a way that reflects your priorities and makes you feel like you're living a balanced life. The hardest part of this is committing to stopping when the time runs out for a task. With practice, you'll learn how to plan effectively, but it takes the commitment first. Decide how much time each task gets based on three things: priority, desired level of quality, and your level of skill. Essential system number 3 is the ideal week. Schedule specific blocks of time on your calendar for each item in your time budget. This reduces decision fatigue, and it helps you see the trade-offs that happen when you let a task run over. I am constantly adjusting my time blocks to reflect reality, and this helps me stay on top of my most important things. Essential system number 4 is the to-do list. By waiting until the end to make the list, we find ourselves getting a lot more creative. There's a block of time on my calendar for a particular aspect of my life. How should I fill it? What's the most important thing I can do? When you get all these systems working together, you experience a level of clarity and focus that is unlike any other. You'll spend your time guilt-free on the things that matter most while letting the rest go. These systems do take effort to set up and maintain, but that effort is tiny compared to the benefits you gain from actually living on purpose. When my students implement this approach, they get more done and they make more time for enjoying their lives. The Intentional Academy community is a great place to get support as you try to get this going and keep you moving forward. We talk about navigating our lists on a daily basis, and we can't wait to support you as you get started. Visit intentionalacademy.com/community to sign up for this free community. intentionalacademy.com/community to get started regaining control of your life. intentionalacademy.com/community to find people like us doing things like this together. And we'll be back next week to talk about what you can do with some of the time you've just found. Your career just got a bit more complicated thanks to the coronavirus crisis. With everyone locked down and working from home, and the hiring freezes that come from an economy that's been stressed to its limit, you're probably experiencing a lot of uncertainty. My heart goes out to all the folks graduating in 2020 and the concerns that they must be having about the future. If you're looking for some hope and for some practical actions you can be taking right now to make sure that you don't get overlooked in this crazy job market, then you need to listen to next week's episode. I can't wait to see you there. Make it easy on yourself and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing. That's it. Thanks for being here. Launching this podcast has been a dream for years, and we're finally able to bring this to you in the style we hope for. If you found this impactful, you may know of someone else who could benefit from it as well. Consider sharing this episode with a few people who matter to you, a few people who you'd like to see succeed at living their best lives too. Thanks again, my friend. We'll see you next week.